Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. Alien Romulus ruled the box office, not only here domestically, but also internationally. We're going to break down those numbers as well as all of the other stories from this past weekend at the box office. And let's jump right into it and look at the top 10 for this past weekend. Alien Romulus came in at $41.5 million. There was a thought that it might get closer to 50 a few days before release, but that's still well within what the expectations were. And the budget for this movie reportedly was around $80 million. So that's a solid start, and we'll see how it holds up in the next week. International grosses are helping that film as well. Deadpool and Wolverine has another soft drop in its fourth week of release, 46.1% for a $29 million weekend. Its domestic total is now approaching $550 million. It Ends With Us also was able to fend off some accusations that it could be front-loaded with a 52% drop in week number 2 and a $24 million second weekend. Its domestic total is now close to $100 million, which means it's pretty much a lock. I mean, it is a lock to be one of the 10 highest grossing movies of the summer. In fourth place is Twisters, which continues to hold well behind some other higher profile competition. It dropped 34.7%, brought in another $9.8 million despite being available on premium video on demand. Its domestic total looks locked in to be above $250 million. In fifth place was the 15th anniversary re-release of Coraline, which made $8.3 million, $11.3 million total because it got a jump, I think, a day or two before Friday. In sixth place was Despicable Me 4. In its seventh week of release, it dropped 24.8% for a $6 million weekend. Its domestic total is now up around $340 million. M. Night Shyamalan's Trap drops 48.4% in weekend number 3 for a weekend of $3.4 million. Its domestic total is now at $35.2 million. Inside Out 2 spends a 10th week in the top 10. It dropped 33.9% for a $3.2 million weekend. The domestic total is now heading towards $650 million. Borderlands, yikes. It did not have a good opening weekend last weekend, and it dropped 72.7% in weekend number 2 for a $3 million total. Keep in mind, Borderlands week 2 came in behind Inside Out 2 week 10. The total for Borderlands right now is at $13.5 million. This movie is an absolute disaster all around, and it's only in the number of theaters it's in because most movies have a 2-weekend contract with theaters. This movie is going to plummet out of movie theaters next weekend because it looks like it was playing to mostly empty theaters, more so on weekend number 2 than weekend number 1. And in 10th place is a film from India called Stree 2, which could also be translated as Woman 2, Terror of the Headless. It made $2.1 million in its debut. It's a Hindi language sequel to 2018's Stree and part of a larger horror universe. All right, so let's break down some of these movies that were in the top 10, and we will start with Alien Romulus. I mentioned its low budget and a solid debut mean that it's on pretty good footing coming out of the gate, and let's see where it compares to other films in the Alien franchise. When we look at the biggest opening weekends for the 9 franchise Alien films that have opened in theaters, Alien Romulus comes in second place behind Prometheus as far as the biggest opening weekend. Prometheus opened to $51 million back in 2012. Alien Romulus is there at $41.5 million in 2024. Alien vs. Predator opened to $38.2 million 20 years ago, back in 2004. Then we have Alien Covenant at $36.1 million in 2017, and Alien 3 back in 1992 at $23.1 million. But this franchise goes all the way back to 1979, so let's normalize those figures a little bit and look at the franchise's opening weekends if you adjust for inflation. And if you make those adjustments, Alien Romulus comes in 5th place. Prometheus still has the number 1 spot at $69.8 million adjusted, followed by Alien vs. Predator at $63.6 million, Alien 3 at $51.8 million, Alien Covenant at $46.3 million, and then Alien Romulus at $41.5 million. Even adjusted for inflation, it comes in ahead of 1997's Alien Resurrection, which had a $32.2 million adjusted opening. Then we have Aliens back in 1986 at $28.8 million, and Alien in 1979 at $15.2 million. And then coming in last, as it should be, is Aliens vs. Predator Requiem from 2007, which is a basement dweller when you adjust for inflation, at $15.2 million. And let's look at what Alien Romulus has ahead of it as far as the domestic box office. Currently, it is the lowest grossing Alien film. No surprise, it's only been out for 3 days, but it has already almost surpassed the gross of both Aliens vs. Predator Requiem and Alien Resurrection. If this thing holds up well, then it could be headed toward $100 million domestically. We'll see if it goes much above that. If it passes that $100 million mark, it will become only the second Alien film to gross over $100 million. But of course, again, these numbers are unadjusted for inflation. When you adjust the box office of Alien movies for inflation, you can see that Aliens vs. Predator Requiem is at $63.3 million, Alien Resurrection is at $93.5 million, and Alien Covenant is at $95.1 million. So if Alien Romulus can hit that $100 million mark, it'll go up to number 6. But then it has a bit of a tougher road ahead. Alien 3 had an inflation-adjusted total of $124.2 million. Alien vs. Predator was at $133.5 million. Prometheus is at $173 million. 1986's Aliens is at $244.1 million. And the original Alien film is going to be the box office king still, with an adjusted total coming in right around $350 million. So that's what we're looking at with the number 1 movie. Let's look at the number 2 movie, which is Deadpool and Wolverine. And when we look at the MCU adjusted for inflation, this is the chart where it made some movement this week. It is now the 7th highest grossing MCU film. When you adjust those numbers, it has passed Captain America Civil War as well as Iron Man 3. And it's coming up real quick on Avengers Age of Ultron, but that's where it's going to stop. It's not going to hit $800 million to get to that number 5 spot with Avengers Infinity War. But still, when you look at that rarefied air there at the top 5, Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man No Way Home, Black Panther, The Avengers, and Avengers Infinity War, that's not too shabby for Deadpool and Wolverine, especially when you consider, again, that it is the only rated R movie on that chart. And when we look at the race for number 1 this summer between Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine, we're seeing a little bit more of that narrowing that I thought we might be starting to see last week. So this is through 24 days of release. You can see that Deadpool and Wolverine still has a lead over where Inside Out 2 was at this point in its release. But this last week, we have really seen Deadpool and Wolverine's lead shrink, and I think it's going to be very close when we decide what the number 1 movie of the summer is going to be. It looked like it was a done deal in earlier weeks, but this past week really shows the strength of Inside Out 2, how well it has performed, not just in its first weekend, but in its 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th weekends. And this may come down to perhaps past Labor Day as we try to decide what the number 1 film of the summer is going to be. All right, let's talk about It Ends With Us just a little bit. These are the highest non-sequel/remake grosses of 2024. You can see that If is there at number 1 at $111.1 million, starring, of course, Ryan Reynolds. But coming up quick on it is It Ends With Us. I think it's going to be number 1 on this list by next weekend because it's at $97.7 million. That's ahead of Bob Marley One Love, which is at number 3 at $96.8 million, as well as The Fall Guy at $92.9 million. The Garfield movie is at number 5 at $91.8 million. Some people might argue that this is a sequel, but I would say that it is not a sequel, a direct sequel at least, to a previous Garfield film. So it is dicey, but I'm going to include that movie on the list. Longlegs is at number 7, followed by Civil War, The Beekeeper, Challengers at number 9, and Argyle rounding out the top 10 at $45.2 million. So very soon, It Ends With Us will have the highest gross of the year for a non-sequel or remake. Despicable Me 4 has fallen out of the top 5, but it still has some place on the charts as far as Illumination films overall. Its $340 million gross has pushed it past Minions to officially become the 5th highest grossing film in Illumination's history. It's about $28 million behind Despicable Me 2. Then we have The Secret Life of Pets in 3rd place, Minions: The Rise of Gru in 2nd place, and the Super Mario Brothers movie in 1st place. And if Despicable Me 4 can bank $30 million more, then it would move up to number 2 all time on the overall Illumination list. But when we look at these movies adjusted for inflation, Despicable Me 4 is a little bit lower down the list. It is at number 9, wedged right in between Despicable Me 3 and The Grinch. Literally, it's going to pass The Grinch probably tomorrow. It should easily pass Sing at number 7. It could well pass the original Despicable Me at number 6, but I'm not quite sure it's got the gas. I really don't think that it does to get to $400 million, which would put it into the overall top 5 if you adjust for inflation. Minions: The Rise of Gru is in that 5th spot at $397.3 million adjusted, followed by the first Minions movie at $445.2 million, The Secret Life of Pets at $482.9 million, Despicable Me 2 at $496.2 million, and then the Super Mario Bros. Movie, the easy winner when it comes to Illumination, at $592.6 million. Overall, when we look at the top 10, there were 3 movies that dropped out this week. Longlegs, which spent 5 weeks in the top 10. Harold and the Purple Crayon, which is out after 2 weeks. And then Cuckoo, the other horror film from Neon that's in the marketplace. It is out of the top 10 after 1 week, so it was not quite able to capture the zeitgeist in the way that Longlegs was. And when we look at the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, Harold and the Purple Crayon had its 2-week guarantee expire, and it lost nearly half of its theaters, 1,496 of them. It's now in 1,829, and I bet you that Borderlands can beat that number next week. Trap lost 745 theaters. It's still in 2,436. Longlegs lost about half of its theaters, 665 of them. It's now out of wide release in 645 theaters. Deadpool and Wolverine lost a chunk of theaters, but really less than 10% of its overall number. It lost 370 of them. It is now in 3,960. And then The Firing Squad loses almost all of its remaining theaters. It lost 357 and is now playing in 83 overall. Let's look at this chart, which I like to call our road to recovery. The blue line is the weekend average for 2015 to 2019. The red line is the weekend average for 2021 to 2023. And that dotted black line is the weekend total for every weekend so far this year. And you can see that we did drop from where we were last weekend, but we are right at pretty much the average where we were pre-pandemic. So the box office recovery, remember, August is usually the time in the summer when the box office is slumping, but we've seen a bit of a resurgence due to the fact that movies like It Ends With Us and now Alien Romulus have been able to draw in people, as well as the spillover effect from Deadpool and Wolverine. The highest grossing film from this weekend in the 2021 to 2023 window is Ryan Reynolds once again with Free Guy, which opened back in 2021. Alien Romulus was able to easily increase over that opening. The highest grossing film for the 2015 to 2019 window was Straight Outta Compton back in 2015, which was a late summer hit and put up some great numbers on this weekend 9 years ago. All right, let's turn our attention away from the domestic marketplace to the international marketplace. That's all markets outside of the US and Canada. And the number one film internationally was Alien Romulus, which brought in $66.7 million. That's a great number internationally. I've seen some reports that it is likely to do over $100 million in China, or at least that it's very possible that it will do that much, which is a rarity at this point when we talk about Hollywood films being released in China. So Alien Romulus, perhaps even more so than the domestic picture, is being embraced by international audiences. It Ends With Us also had a good international weekend. It brought in $33.1 million, which is slightly ahead of Deadpool and Wolverine's $32.9 million. In fourth place is a film that came out earlier this year, Detective Conan, The $1 Million Pentagram, at $16.5 million. That's largely because it came out in China this past weekend, and there has been a huge surge in interest for anime in China. And then in fifth place is Despicable Me 4, which brings in $14.6 million. When we take those international numbers, we combine them with the domestic numbers, we get our top 5 films worldwide. And Alien Romulus was able to debut with over $100 million globally in weekend 1. Again, for a movie at its budget point, that is a very good opening. $108.2 million overall for Alien Romulus. Deadpool and Wolverine drops 44.7% and brings in another $61.9 million globally, followed by It Ends With Us, which drops 28.6% and brings in another $57.1 million. This is going to be a very, very financially successful film. Despicable Me 4 drops 22.8% for another $20.6 million. And then we have Detective Conan, The $1 Million Pentagram, with its $16.5 million gross from China. And let's look at the Alien franchise worldwide. Now, I don't do adjusting for inflation as far as worldwide numbers because it's a lot more complicated than adjusting the American dollar. You have exchange rates, you have different amounts of money coming in from different countries that will require different calculations. It's not quite as straightforward as adjusting for inflation just here in the US. So I don't have adjusted numbers for the Alien franchise worldwide, but I can say that Alien Romulus has made $108.2 million, which is close to the overall worldwide total of Aliens vs. Predator Requiem. Alien 3 is in 7th place at 158.5, followed by Alien Resurrection at 160.7. And if Alien Romulus can get up to that $200 million mark worldwide, and I think it's very likely that it can, it'll become just the third Alien film to do so, behind Alien Covenant at $238.5 million, and Prometheus, which is the undisputed king here, at $402.4 million. I also want to talk a little bit about Deadpool and Wolverine as far as its overall worldwide gross. It's at $1.14 billion, which moves it past Captain Marvel and Spider-Man Far From Home. It is very close to overtaking Captain America Civil War, and Iron Man 3 won't be too far behind. And let's see if it can get to $1.33 billion. That would put it at Black Panther level there at number 6, and $1.39 billion, basically $1.4 billion, would get it to Avengers Age of Ultron in 5th place. One chart that it doesn't have to climb anymore is the highest grossing R-rated films of all time worldwide, because it is now past Joker at $1.14 billion to become the highest grossing R-rated film after already breaking that record domestically. So Deadpool and Wolverine can now lay claim to being the most successful R-rated film as far as raw box office gross, both domestically and worldwide. Just another record that's been broken this summer, in a summer, quite frankly, for a while, that looked like it wasn't going to break very many records. All right, before we look at the summer box office and some of the specialty charts for the weekend, just a couple of revisions from last week's show. Sometimes numbers come in late, and I want to make sure that you have the most accurate information. So this is for the weekend of August 9th, and when we look at the biggest theater count changes, the Fabulous Four had not yet reported when I was doing my show last week. It actually had the second biggest theater loss of the weekend. It lost 763 theaters and was only in 157 theaters going into this weekend. So I would imagine that it is pretty much out of release at this point. And then the per theater averages for August 9th through the 11th. There were a couple of movies that hadn't reported yet. One of them was the Jean-Pierre Melville film Army of Shadows, which continues to play in one theater and brought in $8,610. And then the documentary Sugarcane also ended up making this list, bringing in $7,648 in one theater. Sugarcane is a documentary delving into the Canadian Indian residential school system, which operated for decades, isolating young Indigenous children in Canada from their native culture. All right, let's get an update on the summer box office. And as I mentioned, It Ends With Us is now a top 10 summer movie at $97.7 million. That knocks The Fall Guy down to number 10. And it also knocks the Garfield movie out of the overall top 10, which means it is the second casualty as far as movies that I picked to be the 10 highest grossing movies of the summer. And let's look at my predictions. My top 4 is in pretty good shape. I got the right 4 movies so far, just not quite in the right order. I picked Deadpool and Wolverine 2nd and Twisters 4th, but Inside Out 2 and Despicable Me 4 are not going to end up where I predicted them to be. Of course, I predicted Despicable Me 4 would be the number 1 movie of the summer. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes I picked a little too high. Furiosa Mad Max Saga, bad pick. It's not going to be on the top 10. A Quiet Place Day 1, I picked just about right at number 7. The Garfield movie, as you can see, has now been eliminated. Bad Boys Ride or Die, I picked too low, but it's still a top 10 movie. And then we have Alien Romulus. I picked Alien Romulus to be the number 10 movie of the summer, and that's pretty much where we are. We have this list of 10 going back to the overall summer box office, and $91.8 million is the number for Alien Romulus to beat in order to get into that top 10. With its opening weekend of $41.5 million, if it holds up decently, it has a good shot of hitting that number. We'll see what word of mouth is. It has cinema score of B+, so I think it's going to be somewhat close. But if it can hold up well in weekend number 2 and do well throughout August and get to $92 million, then I will have actually predicted it just in the perfect spot at number 10. That'll give me an overall summer prediction of 8 out of 10 movies. But if Alien Romulus can't make the top 10, then I will have only picked 7 of the 10 summer movies correctly. So something to watch as we wrap up this summer movie season. All right, let's take a look at some of these specialty charts from this past weekend, and we'll start with the top per theater averages. And as of now, this could get revised once final numbers come in. 4 of these top 5 movies are all movies that were in wide release, which means that there are some very happy theater owners this past weekend. Alien Romulus has the best per theater average of the weekend at $10,682 per theater in 3,885 theaters. The top 3 were all actually in roughly the same amount of theaters. Deadpool and Wolverine comes in second at $7,323 per theater, followed by It Ends With Us at $6,419 per theater. And when you look at those numbers, that means that on average, if a theater was playing all 3 of those movies, and most multiplexes would have been, they would have made over $20,000 this past weekend just from those 3 movies. So that's not too shabby. In 4th place, playing in one theater, is a film called Mountains, which is set in Miami's Little Haiti. The movie's about parents struggling to relate to their son and facing the growing threat of their neighborhood disappearing in the face of gentrification. And then in 5th place is the 15th anniversary of Coraline, which brought in $5,467 per theater in 1,535 theaters. Looking at the top films in limited release, which I define as 1,000 theaters or fewer, Stree 2 is in first place at $2.1 million, playing in 666 theaters. I have to think that that was not a coincidence, given the fact that it's a horror movie. In second place was Dee Dee, which continues to play very well in limited release. It expanded to 427 theaters and brought in another $700,000. In third place was Skincare, playing in 768 theaters, bringing in $315,000. Skincare stars Elizabeth Banks as an upstart skincare line owner who faces stiff competition from a store across the street and tries to find out who might be sabotaging her. In fourth place is Rob Peace, which is about a son fighting to free his imprisoned father. The movie's directed by Chiwetel Ejiofor and also stars Mary J. Blige. Rob Peace opened in 526 theaters and brought in $253,000. And then in fifth place is Sing Sing in its 6th week of release, which is now expanded to 112 theaters and brought in just over $250,000. I had the privilege of actually seeing Sing Sing yesterday at a special screening that was put on by the Arkansas Cinema Society, and it is a really, really good movie featuring a fantastic performance from Coleman Domingo. He was actually there and did a Q&A after the show. And when we talk about awards season, I'm telling you right now, Coleman Domingo's performance in Sing Sing is going to be in the conversation, and it should be in the conversation. And I think that's one reason why A24 has been rolling out this movie so slowly. They are looking to expand the profile of this film past the summer season, going into the fall and the awards season, because they've got something really special there. I think with the cast of this movie, with the concept of this movie, and particularly with the lead performance from Coleman Domingo. There has been no change as far as the top 10 movies of the year from last week. I just like to put it up here every week for posterity. Inside Out 2 is at $642.1 million. Deadpool and Wolverine is at $545.8 million. And that race for the number one movie of the summer will also be the race for the number one movie of the year so far. A Quiet Place Day 1 is at number 10. So the line to beat to break into the top 10 right now is $138.8 million. Looking at the top 10 films worldwide for this year, we do have one change, which is that another film from China has entered the top 10, Successor, which has made $417.5 million. It is now number 9 behind 2 other films from China, YOLO at number 7 and Pegasus 2 at number 8. That bumps Bad Boys Ride or Die down to number 10 and drops Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes off of the 2024 worldwide top 10. We still have 2 movies that have made $1 billion so far. Inside Out 2 at $1.6 billion and Deadpool and Wolverine at $1.1 billion. And looking at the top 10 highest grossing movies for the last 365 days, so that's movies released from August 19th, 2023 to August 19th, 2024, nothing has changed here except that I made one correction down there at number 10. I put Bad Boys Ride or Die on last week at number 10 when I was revising this chart without thinking about the fact that it should be Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. The reason I didn't put it on is because it's actually been on and off this chart a couple times, and my brain just said that it had already been eliminated. It is actually going to get knocked off pretty soon, probably by Successor or another film. But that is the actual chart reflecting what it should be for the last 365 days. Before we wrap up the box office portion of the show, I'd like to take, as I often do, a look at a weekend in box office history, and we're going to go back 20 years to another weekend when Xenomorphs ruled the box office. It's August 13th through the 15th, 2004, which saw the release of AVP, Alien vs. Predator, at $38.2 million. It did about half of its business in that opening weekend. It ended at $80.2 million. By the way, I said on last week's show that I was going to do a ranking video for the Alien franchise, which I am still going to do here on the channel this week. What happened was that I actually took a much deeper dive into the franchise than I had anticipated, not only watching the theatrical versions of the movies, but also the director's cut / special editions, and then taking a jump into all of the different short films that have been released across the internet over the years. So that video has actually been shot. I'm editing it right now. It will hit the channel this week. But as always, I took a very simple task and made it much more complicated. That's very on brand for me, which you probably know if you watch this show regularly. Going back to that weekend of August 13th to the 15th, 2004, in second place was the opening weekend of The Princess Diaries 2 Royal Engagement, which made $22.9 million from Friday through Sunday. It actually had gotten a jump on the weekend, so it had a total at that point of $37.1 million. Princess Diaries 2 came in just under $100 million domestically. Collateral, in its second week, dropped 34.5% for a $16.1 million weekend and a $52 million total to that point. It ended up at just over $100 million domestically. If you haven't seen Collateral, it's a great movie starring Jamie Foxx and Tom Cruise, directed by Michael Mann. In fourth place was Yu-Gi-Oh! The Movie, Pyramid of Light. I think I probably made a lot of people who were young in 2004 feel old just then. Well, congratulations. That's how we feel all the time. $9.4 million in its opening weekend. It made $19.7 million overall domestically. And then in fifth place, Jesus Christ, it's Jason Bourne. The Bourne Supremacy in its fourth week of release dropped 40.2% for an $8.6 million weekend. Its total to that point was $139.6 million, and it would end up making $176.2 million. But what do these numbers look like when we flash forward 20 years and put these box office numbers in inflation-adjusted dollars? Well, when we hit that inflation button, we can see that Alien vs. Predator opens to an adjusted total of $63.7 million and a final adjusted total of $133.6 million. The Princess Diaries 2 comes in at $38.2 million adjusted and a $158 million adjusted domestic total. Collateral comes in third place at $26.9 million with a final adjusted gross of $168.1 million. Yu-Gi-Oh! The Movie opened to an adjusted total of $15.7 million and a final adjusted total of $32.9 million. And The Bourne Supremacy comes in at $14.3 million in weekend number 4. Its adjusted domestic total comes in just shy of $300 million at $293.4 million. So that's a look at what was going on at the box office. Very quickly, let's take a look at the latest data we have for streaming, since we've reintegrated streaming charts into the show. And we'll start with the last week of data we have from Netflix. This is for August 5th through the 11th. At number 1 for a second week is Saving Bikini Bottom, the SpongeBob SquarePants spin-off movie, with another 13.45 million views, followed by A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, also staying on the chart in second place at 8.43 million views. Then in third place is the debut of The Umbrella Academy Season 4, the final season of that show, at 8.38 million views. Doesn't quite have the same pull that it used to, but a number 3 debut is decent for that final season. And then we have a bunch of films that are not Netflix originals. That's because this is partly the first week of August when a lot of new movies hit the service. Ferdinand comes in fourth place at 7.26 million views. Kingsman: The Secret Service comes in fifth at 6.93 million views. Jack Reacher: Never Go Back, which was already on the top 10, stays at number 6 at 6.46 million views. Then we have Law Abiding Citizen hitting the chart at number 7. Kingsman: The Golden Circle hitting the chart at number 8. The Bad Guy stays on the chart at number 9. And the first Jack Reacher film, called, well, Jack Reacher, is at number 10 with 4.48 million views. And we also have one change to the most watched Netflix programs of the year. This is original series, movies, you name it, anything that's been streaming on Netflix. Under Paris is now the 5th most watched Netflix program of the year at 98.50 million views, and it's just behind Society of the Snow and Lift, so it could very easily and very soon be number 3 on this list. Damsel, Bridgerton Season 3, Lift, and Society of the Snow are the top 4. Fool Me Once moves down to number 6, and the rest of the top 10 stays as it was with Baby Reindeer, A Family Affair, Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F, and Atlas, rounding out the 10 most watched programs of the year. Let's turn now to the Nielsen charts. This is US streaming data only, and it's delayed by about a month, which is how long it takes Nielsen to put these numbers together. So we're going to go back to the week of July 15th through the 21st. These are the 10 most watched movies across the streaming services that Nielsen measures. At number 1 was Trolls Band Together on Netflix with 15.6 million hours watched, followed by Land of Bad, also on Netflix at 14.1 million hours watched, and Hillbilly Elegy coming in third place at 9.2 million hours watched. This coincides with Donald Trump selecting J.D. Vance as his running mate. Hillbilly Elegy is the life story of J.D. Vance, so it's no surprise that this would get a bump as far as at-home viewing. The Long Game stays at 4th, followed by Descendants, The Rise of Red in 5th. Find Me Falling hits the charts at number 6 with 6.3 million hours watched. Then we have Tyler Perry's Divorce in the Black on Amazon at number 7. If at number 8 on Paramount Plus. My Spy, The Eternal City debuts on the chart at number 9, streaming on Amazon at 5.6 million hours watched. And Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F rounds out the top 10 at 5.4 million hours watched. Again, much more front-loaded than a movie like Damsel, but it also put up huge numbers in those first couple weeks. Looking at the most watched streaming shows for July 15th through the 21st, it was finale week for The Boys, and it was able to lead all shows measured by Nielsen at 22.1 million hours watched, followed by House of the Dragon, which was still mid-season at 18.4 million hours watched. The new season of Cobra Kai, or I guess part 1 of the new season, comes in third place at just over 18 million hours watched, followed by Love Island at number 4 and Bluey at number 5. Family Guy is at number 6, followed by Grey's Anatomy and Suits at numbers 7 and 8. NCIS returns to the top 10. It pops on and off from time to time at 13.8 million hours watched, and Bob's Burgers rounds out the 10 most watched streaming shows. When we look at the Nielsen top 20 streaming shows, the 10 most watched originals and the 10 most watched library shows, this is where they stack up as far as watch time per available episode. Homicide Los Angeles on Netflix is at number 1 with 1.56 million hours watched per episode, followed by House of the Dragon at 1.15 million hours watched per episode. Then we have Receiver on Netflix at number 3. The Acolyte makes, I believe, just its third appearance on the Nielsen Top 20. It was there the first couple weeks, and then this was the finale week. It brought in almost 700,000 hours watched per episode, but again, the fact that it did not make the chart except for the very beginning and the very end of the season, and it didn't put up huge numbers, tells me that this was probably a bit of a disappointment for Disney, at least as far as domestic viewing. The Boys comes in 5th place with 692,000 hours watched per episode, followed by Your Honor at 6th, Vikings Valhalla in 7th, The Bear in 8th with about 337,000 hours per episode, Cobra Kai in 9th place, and Bridgerton rounding out the top 10. And just a couple changes to wrap us out as far as the most watched original streaming series of the year. First of all, when we look at the most viewed original streaming series through July 21st, Bridgerton remains number 1, and overall it is the only original streaming series to be one of the 10 most watched shows of the year. It's at number 5 overall. But The Boys, as it headed to the end of season 4, cracks the overall top 5 as far as original series at 119.5 million hours watched. It comes in behind Fool Me Once, Love is Blind, and Fallout. Avatar: The Last Airbender falls to number 6, followed by The Gentleman. Evil actually moves up to number 8, moving past Reacher on Amazon, and Three Body Problem rounds out the top 10. And looking at the most watched library streaming series in the US through July 21st, we had one change, which is that Bob's Burgers is now the 8th most watched library streaming series, and Your Honor moves down to number 10. But you can also see that 9 of these 10 shows are also among the 10 most watched streaming shows, which just goes to show you that original series may be a little bit more buzzy and they may help to drive new signups, but it's these library series, the old favorites, that are also the backbone of all of these various streaming services. And that wraps us up for this week. Quickly, let's take a look at a few movies that are hitting theaters this upcoming weekend. On Friday, the newest version of The Crow, starring Bill Skarsgård, hits theaters. It is the latest adaptation of the graphic novel from Ghost in the Shell and Snow White and the Huntsman director Rupert Sanders. Something tells me The Crow will not be challenging for the top 10 movies of the summer. Also hitting theaters this Friday and getting some good early reviews is Blink Twice. Zoe Kravitz directs and co-wrote this creepy island mystery as Channing Tatum plays a billionaire who lures two women to his private island for a big party, but then strange things begin to happen. This looks like an interesting movie. I'm going to try to check it out if I can. Also hitting many theaters nationwide this Friday is The Forge, about an aimless young man who tries to find his place in the world and finds some answers through faith. This is aimed at a Christian audience, and it's from the creator of hit faith-based movies like The War Room. And also hitting many theaters this weekend is Strange Darling, which is about a casual fling which turns into a fight for survival when a woman chooses the wrong guy to sleep with. Strange Darling stars Willa Fitzgerald and Kyle Gallner. And that wraps up Charts with Dan for this week. Thank you so much for spending part of your day here with me. Stay tuned right here to the channel. I've got that alien video as well as some other stuff coming up. And if you like what you see, be sure to hit that subscribe button and tell your friends, because I'd love to keep growing this channel and talk about weird, nerdy movie stuff like this. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.